The next morning, the sunlight was shining through my son's window in his nursery, shining down perfectly on my back as I laid on the eggshell-colored carpet. Feeling the sunlight warming my back, causing me to begin to wake up. My eyes softly opened as I rolled over onto my back, remembering that I fell asleep on the floor of his room last night. My 3-month-old son was already awake, standing up in his crib that he was quickly beginning to outgrow, leaning his head over the railing as his hands held onto the railing. He was looking down at me with his big, beautiful brown eyes. He began to smile and giggle as he noticed I was waking up, reaching his hands out for me to pick him up. I smiled at him as I laid there. I could hear John's soft footsteps walking down the hall. Even for someone as tall as John, he always walked quietly, especially through our house, never fully putting his heel all the way down onto the ground before taking another step. He softly opened the door to see me, still laying on the floor. "Dada, Dada, Dada," our son said as he giggled, reaching his hands out to John. He had definitely started as a warm-up to John since last night. This morning, something about our little boy just seemed different. John leaned over to pick him up. Our son wrapped his arms around his father's neck as he held him in his arms. He touched the back of John's arm. "We will go bye-bye, Daddy," our son softly said as he rubbed John's arm. Our little boy was starting to look more like a 2-year-old than a 3-month-old. Instead of crawling or the typical baby stumbling around walk, he was walking like he'd been doing it for a while. All the clothes we had bought for a newborn up to a 12-month no longer fit. His short red hair was now past his chin. More and more freckles were appearing on his little round apple cheeks. Something about today just seemed brighter. The air around us seemed lighter. The air smelled sweeter for the first time in weeks. We all felt happier and we were all smiling. Everything felt like it would be okay, like it would all work out. My cell phone began ringing in the loo. While John was holding our son, I got up off the floor to answer my phone. Walking down the hall, careful to make sure my bare feet didn't step on the glass that had taken up most of the hallway floor. By the time I picked up my phone, it had already stopped ringing. I played the voicemail, turning the speaker. "This is the medical examiner's office, calling for Mrs. Johnson regarding Miss Lynn's remains. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. Thank you and have a wonderful day." The message ended. I looked over at John, who had followed me into the living room. His face seemed slightly concerned after we listened to the message. I shrugged my shoulders as I placed the phone back down the end of the table, next to the couch. He raised his left eyebrow as his bounced our baby in his arms. "Baby, aren't you going to call him back? That message seemed kind of important," John softly said to me. I had after breakfast. Whatever it is, it can wait till then. Besides, they were probably just calling to say that they'd finished the autopsy and should send the people from the funeral home to pick up her body up to be prepared for the funeral. "I'm sure everything is fine," I said as tears began to collect in my eyes, trying to hold them back. I quickly wiped my eyes before the tears could leave them, trying to hide my pain and sorrow. The pain grew in my heart from the loss of my sister, the person I was close to, basically my whole life, the person that was always there for me, the person I would run to in the middle of the night whenever she needed anything. John sat our son down on the couch before going into the hallway to clean all the broken glass. Our little boy was already big enough to sit by himself to watch TV. I started breakfast for the 3 of us. I tried not to think too much of the voicemail left by the examiner's office. I scrambled some eggs and cut some fresh fruit, preparing our plates before placing them on the dining table, just in time to see John walking back into the living room after we finished cleaning up the hallway. The 3 of us sat down at the table. My phone began to ring as we started to eat. This time, I completely ignored it as we ate breakfast. Whoever it was could wait till we finished. The phone kept ringing, one call after another, not even waiting a minute or two before calling back. Whoever it was could wait until we were done. After we finished eating, I put the dishes into the sink before walking over to my phone to see what all the fuss was about. I picked it up to see I had over 15 missed calls and 3 voicemails, all from the same number. It was the medical examiner's office again. I played the messages on speaker. Mrs. Johnson, please call the medical examiner's office as soon as you can. It's urgent, the first voicemail. Miss Johnson, I really need to speak with you about your sister's remains. Please call me back. My voice grew with urgency and worry with each message. Mrs. Johnson, it is an emergency. Please answer your phone. Test results came back. The last message was extremely shaky and almost sounded scared, like he couldn't wrap his brain around what happened or how the test results came back. The sound of his shaking voice was more than enough to scare me. The small hairs on the back of my neck stood straight out as goosebumps ran across my entire body. Walking into the backyard, my phone in my hand, to sit down on one of the oversized rocking chairs overlooking my flower bed, which was filled with bright red roses with tall sunflowers behind them. I picked up my pack of cigarettes and my bright blue lighter. Taking one of the cigarettes out of the pack, I pressed the call back option on my cell phone as I held a cigarette to my lips as I lit it. I slowly let out a small cloud of smoke, taking in another puff, and someone answered on the other end of the phone. Hello, this is the medical examiner's office. How can I help you? A sweet voice said on the other end of the phone. Yes, ma'am, this is Mrs. Johnson. I had a few missed calls. Yes, Mrs. Johnson, we've been trying to get a hold of you. Do you mind holding for a moment while I let the doctor know you're on the phone? The young woman asked very kindly, while seeming slightly worried. I don't mind at all. As quickly as the words left my mouth, she put the call on hold and transferred me over to the doctor. The phone played the normal elevator kind of music while waiting for the doctor to come to the phone. Mrs. Johnson, this is Dr. English. We've been trying to get in touch with you over your sister's autopsy. I'm not sure how, but when we ran a DNA test, the results came back abnormal, to say the least. His voice sounded strained and cracking as he said it. I don't understand. What do you mean it came back abnormal? Beginning to become worried. This wasn't a normal response you would get from a normal everyday reporter. The DNA samples we took come back as something inhuman and non-animal. We ran the test 10 separate times with 10 different samples from her body. I've never seen anything like this before in my life. Whatever is laying on my exam table isn't your sister. I don't know what it is, but it definitely isn't human. He said as he was slightly stuttering some of the words, trying to get them out of his mouth. His voice sounded worried, scared, and extremely confused by the whole thing. I dropped my phone as the words left his mouth. I sat there confused, lost in my thoughts inside my head. I just sat there with a confused look on my face. All of this was far too much for anyone to take, let alone process. I'd completely forgot about my cigarette as I sat there. I hadn't taken a puff of it for a while. Feeling it burn the insides of my pointer and middle finger, I jerked my hand, causing the cigarette to fall from my fingers. The pain from the burning cigarette brought me back to reality and out of my head. If it wasn't my sister that died in my bathtub, then who was it? I yelled for John to call the police as I knelt down beside the bathtub. Her once tanned arm hanging off the side of the tub as blood dripped from her finger to the floor. Both of her arms were cut from her small, delicate wrist all the way up to the inside of her elbow. I held my sister's lifeless body, pulling her as close to me as possible. Her blonde hair had been soaked red from her blood. Her bright ocean blue eyes had turned pale. Her body was already turning cold to the touch. I knew there was nothing anyone could do for her. John walked into the bathroom I took one. He turned the water up, trying to pull me away from my sister. My clothes were soaked in bloody water and tears. I wouldn't let go. I couldn't. She was my little sister, and I was supposed to protect her. This time I couldn't. I failed her. If I had known this would happen, I would never have asked her to come over that night. I wouldn't have called her. I would have just figured something else out instead. As I held her, Her head slumped onto me over my shoulder, her blood-soaked hair falling into her face. She was only 24. She had so much to live for. She had so much left to do with her life. A loud knock on the front door, sound loud that it startled both of us. John went to answer it as I held onto my sister, streams of tears falling from my eyes. I couldn't hold them back. I couldn't be strong, not right now. The police followed John into the bathroom. I had to let go, even though I didn't want to. John pulled me up and held me tight as I sobbed into his chest. When I finally let go of him, John grabbed me some clothes to change into, as what I had on was soaking wet and causing me to shiver. The police started their investigation. Of course, we couldn't tell them everything that had happened that night. We would sound completely insane. I walked into the living room with John and our sweet baby boy following me. He was giggling and laughing as John held him. A couple of hours passed with the medical examiner coming to pick up the body. People were in and out of the house, coming and going. A couple of the officers kneeled down in front of John and myself. One of them made goofy noises and faces to distract our son while we talked. They asked why she was over that night and why we hadn't been home. I explained to them that I asked her to watch our son while we went to the hospital because John had a small accident. No one questioned how he was stabbed in the back of his arm. After talking for a while, they told us that it would be ruled a suicide. There's actually no evidence to be ruled as anything other than a horrible suicide. I found the knife she'd used. It had fallen under her when it slipped out of her hand as her body became lifeless. The best guess was that she was probably severely depressed and overly stressed. They said someone would be by in the morning to clean up the blood in the bathroom. That the best thing we could do right now was to focus on our new bundle of joy to help us get through such a hard time. After everyone left, I called a few family members to let them know what had happened. Eva was so shocked that she would kill herself. In the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't something she would do. I knew something or someone would have to push her to do it. I laid the baby down in his crib, turning his monitor on to make sure he was fine throughout the rest of the night. John and I laid down in our bed to try to get a few hours of sleep. John, like always, fell asleep very quick. I don't know what it is about men, but it seems as soon as their head hits the pillow, they're asleep. Me, on the other hand, took a little while to fall asleep. I laid there thinking about everything as I listened to him snore. I couldn't have been asleep for more than an hour when I was woken up to a strange voice. It was a deep, almost growling voice. It sounded demonic. John was still fast asleep, completely oblivious to her. He could sleep through pretty much anything. I looked over at the monitor. My son was standing up in his crib, looking at something just out of reach of the camera, his arms reaching out to whatever it was. After a moment or two, I could see the shadow-like figure coming closer and closer to my son. It turned its head and was looking straight into the camera, almost like it could see me. It had bright, red, beady eyes. I jumped out of bed, running to his room. I could hear pictures falling off the walls as I ran to his room, my feet hitting the floor harder than they ever had before. I swung open the door, expecting to find someone or something trying to get my son. However, that wasn't what I opened the door to. My son was sound asleep in his crib. No sounds, no weird voices, just him sleeping. Walking over to his crib, I rubbed my hand against his soft little cheek, telling myself I was just imagining things from a lack of sleep, but it was just a dream. A dream that felt very real. My heart was still pounding as I lay down on the floor next to his crib. Miss Sutton did not look up from her drawing. She quietly started humming to herself, her long red hair falling down into her face. Always asking her those questions wasn't going to work. "Do you mind showing me what you're drawing?" Softly and sweetly asking, making sure my voice was at a pleasant tone, as if I was talking to a shy child. She slowly nodded her head up and down, placing the crayon down that she'd been using to draw with, then picked up the piece of water paper that she'd been drawing on. turning it towards me to show her artwork. A tall, dark, shadowy figure with long talon claws that had bright red eyes with spikes sticking out the top of its head. It was surrounded by others just like her. It was in this moment I knew we had encountered the same kind of demon. I cleared my throat as I saw the paper, trying hard to hide just how scared I truly was. Still, even with showing me the picture, she had not turned to look my way, her eyes staring at the side of the bed. She ran her pale, wrinkly fingers through her hair, pushing it back behind her ear. She leaned over close to me, never looking my way. "You know, one is standing right behind you, right?" she softly whispered. As the words hit my ears, I felt a chill run down my spine and goosebumps covered my skin. Her voice sounded soft. She seemed completely unfazed by what she said, as if it was completely normal to her. "Miss Sutton, what is standing behind me?" I asked as she stared at the bed. "The demon, sweetheart. He's right behind you. He wants to take your son away from you and will do whatever he can to have for himself," she said as she looked at me for the first time since I'd been in the room. The lights in her room began flickering on and off. I sat there in front of her, kind of dumbfounded. "What do you mean he wants my son?" Slightly tilting my head as I asked the question. I definitely hadn't said anything to her or anyone here. Aren't we even having this son? I only spoke about my sister. "Sweetheart, they all want him, because he is the chosen one and he will be their king. They will never stop coming for him, no matter what you do." Her voice began to sound strange. She began cackling as the lights flickered more and more, becoming faster and faster. The door opened and everything went back to normal. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your hour is up. You can come back tomorrow if you like. Seems you being here is doing Miss Sutton some good." The nurse smiled as she stood at the door. I turned my head back to Miss Sutton. She was sitting there like nothing had happened, just smiling. Not knowing what to say, I stood up and walked out of the room. My head felt like it was spinning. We didn't talk as the nurse walked me back down to the front door. I just looked ahead of me as we walked. I thanked her for letting me see Miss Sutton as I walked out the front door. Pulling my phone at my pocket to call John, I leaned against my car, pulling a cigarette out to light her. Still trying to wrap my head around what just happened. I knew I had to come back tomorrow. I needed to find out everything she knew. "Hey baby, how'd it go? Did you get the answers you were looking for?" John answered the phone, sounding excited to hear me, even though I only left this morning. For the last 10 years, we had never been away from each other for more than a few hours at a time. It felt weird to do this on my own. Looking down at the ground, kicking my feet around the rocks as I took a long drag of my cigarette, the wind slowly blowing my hair around, letting the smoke escape from my lips before answering John's question. Kinda, it's hard to explain. I still have a lot of unanswered questions. No idea how to find my sister yet. There's something we need to talk about when I get home. I was unsure of how to even try to explain what happened today. We said our goodbyes before getting off the phone. I put my cigarette out and began my drive back home, turning on the radio to listen to music on my drive to keep myself awake. It had been a few long days since my world had been turned upside down and spun for a loop. Feeling like I've been on the most intense roller coaster of my life. I couldn't find a radio station to save my life out here. Nothing but static played as I tried flipping through all the stations. However, the last station, I could hear a voice. I thought it was a song trying to play, but I was slightly out of range for it to come in clearly. Hoping it would come in soon, I left it on that channel, but it turned down some. After a few miles, the voice became more clearly, slightly standing out among the static. The voice was deep and raspy. I turned the volume up, trying to make out what it was saying. "Joe, I know you can hear me. I will be taking your son. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't run, and you can't hide. I will even make you a deal with the devil himself. If you give us Stephen, we will give you your sister back, completely unharmed and healthy. However, if you don't, we will torture her until she is begging to die. We will make it a slow and painful death." I pulled over the side of the road, tears falling from my eyes as I realized it wasn't just some random station playing some random song. It was the demon that wanted my son. My body began to shake as I sat there completely helpless, not knowing what to do next. I couldn't just give my son to some monsters. I also couldn't let them keep my sister. There had to be a way to keep my son out of harm's way, while also getting my sister back from him. The next morning, after getting ready, I gave both my guys hugs and kisses as I left the house. I needed to get to the mental hospital as soon as possible. I had to try to find out everything Miss Sutton knows about these things. There has to be a way to kill them, send them back to hell, or something. I got into my car, closing the door as I cranked the car, buckling my seatbelt as I could see the guy standing at the front door. John and Stephen waved to me from the doorway as I backed out of our driveway. Their smiling faces always made everything so much better. I began my hour-long drive for Mensters. Playing random songs on the radio, I was determined not to be afraid of the demon voice or what they were capable of. I wasn't going to show fear, as it seemed they could see me for everywhere I was. I had to do my best to keep my mind on finding a way to defeat. I danced and sang in my car like I didn't have a worry in the world. Finally, I pulled into the long driveway leading to the hospital. The tall, skinny trees casted creepy shadows on the concrete driveway as I pulled in. I quickly parked my car and hopes of getting some much-needed answers to all the questions I still had. If anything, yesterday left me with more unanswered questions than it did actually answering any I already had. The hospital still seemed just as creaky as the day before. The trees seemed to lean down, almost touching me as I walked up to the front door, taking in a deep breath before pulling the door wide open as I walked in. Almost like deja vu from the day before. The long hallway leading to the front desk somehow seemed even longer than it had yesterday. There seemed to be even more pieces of ceiling covering the floor. I ran my fingers through my long hair as I began pulling it up into a ponytail. I walked up to the front desk, ringing the small silver bell sitting on the desk. I waited for a nurse to come. Standing there, I began looking around for a nurse. However, I could see no one was around. I called out, but no one answered. I decided to walk up to the third floor, hoping someone would be at the nurse's station to let me into Miss Sutton's room. I began making my way down the second long hallway. I would see darker, but still of a light it out. Everything looked to have been scattered across the floor instead of piled around the walls of the hallway. It felt like I'd been walking down the hallway for at least 20 minutes as I finally came to the end. I could see the elevator as I walked closer. I pressed the up button and waited for the elevator doors to open. Stepping into it, my anxiety began to rise. The elevator began to shake as it went up to the third floor, holding onto the rail on the side of the walls as I watched the numbers rise to 3. Standing there as I waited for the doors to open to let me out. Letting go of the rail, knowing the doors broke. The small elevator began filling with fog. It covered my feet as it grew thicker. I couldn't see through it as it began to cover my legs before overtaking the entire elevator. I never heard the ding of the doors opening or closing. I could feel the elevator going down. The fog was so thick, I couldn't even see the glow from the numbers showing what floor it was on. It jerked a few times, for it felt like the elevator was falling, like someone had snapped the cords holding it up. It kept falling and falling as I held on for dear life. I knew this had to be it for me. I knew the elevator was going to hit the ground at some point and go up in flames. I could feel it in every bone of my body, with every fiber of my being. Yet there was nothing I could do about it. If it wasn't my sister that died in my bathtub, then who or what was it? Why did it look just like my sister? If it wasn't her, then where the hell is she? I have so many questions left unanswered. The whole situation is turning from weird to weirder. It hasn't even been 24 hours since I thought I found my sister dead in my bathtub. Hell, I was covered in whatever that thing was blood. I held it close to me, thinking it was my own flesh and blood sister. I cried as I held it. A thing's blood soaked my clothes. I thought of it made my skin crawl. Or couldn't look and smell just like someone else. When did it take her? I wasn't even sure if I had talked to my sister at all that night, or it was something else the whole time. Now she's alive, but missing. Or at least I hope. At least if she's just missing, we have a chance of finding her. So many extreme emotions running through my body all at once. I couldn't keep my mind straight. Bouncing from one thought to another. I didn't even know where to begin, or what I could even do. All I knew was two things. I had to find my sister. Alive or dead, I needed to find her. I needed my questions answered. I also knew that no matter what, I had to keep my family safe. John walked outside, leaving the back door doors open so we could hear our son. I lit another cigarette, trying to calm myself down. I needed to be able to gather my thoughts. Staring off into space, lost in my own head and trapped inside my thoughts, wasn't going to do anyone any good. Images of the night before began flashing through my head. Pictures of the bloody bathroom filled my mind. I could still feel the blood all over my arms and my clothes. The hair on my arms stood straight up as I shook my head, trying to get rid of the images inside my head. John walked over to me, bending down to hug my head. "Baby, you okay?" He softly asked as he held my head to his chest. I don't know right now. I'm confused and scared. I don't know what to do at this point, but what I can do. My voice slightly giving away as a tear ran down my soft cheek. What did the examiner say? He said as he pulled away to look into my eyes. It wasn't hair. They don't know what that thing is they pulled out of our bathtub, but it wasn't my sister. It wasn't even human. I couldn't control my voice as I said it. John, I don't know what or who it was, but it wasn't my sister. Whatever I was holding wasn't even human. I looked down at the ground. I took a long drag from my cigarette. Part of me felt ashamed for not knowing that it wasn't actually my sister. John tilted his head and raised his left eyebrow as he looked at me, almost like he was thinking in his head that this woman he married was losing her mind. We'd been married for so long, and he had never seen me this way. I'm not even sure if he'd ever seen me scared before. I'm not one that scares easily, not even jump scares. I've gone through tons and tons of haunted houses. I watched the scariest horror movies in the middle of the night with the lights off. This is more terrifying than anything I have ever seen before. My heart was racing just to the thought of the night before. I picked my phone up from the grass to walk back inside. I was trying to figure out how in the world I was going to explain this to our family, especially being I just told them last night that my sister was dead. I held her lifeless body. How do you explain that to someone? Oh hey, yeah, you remember how I told you my sister tragically took her own life in my bathtub? Our babysitting my son? Yeah, it was just a joke, and now no one knows where she is or how to even find her, but I'm sure it'll be okay. Yeah, right. I'm sure that will go over just great. For now, I guess it's just John and I figuring this out as we go. John and I walked back into the house and sat down on the couch. I started searching supernatural things on my phone. I figured it was as good of a start as anything at this. John flipped through the channels on the TV, while I searched through articles on my phone. Everything from Bigfoot to demons popped up. Most terrifying things came up. Things that nightmares are made of. Things that you don't want to ever know are real. Nothing fits, except for one. It didn't have a name though, other than it was a type of demon. This particular demon could change shape, their smell, and their true voice. Basically, they could change everything about themselves just to copy whoever they want. Their normal appearance is basically a shadow, with bright, beady eyes and long, sharp talons for fingers. They eat the hearts of their victims. However, they can only hold the appearance of a human for a short while, and only if the humans they were mocking wasn't close by. The only time they can keep the appearance of a human is if they died while in the human's form. I also like to keep the person they are imitating and torture them until they were no longer useful to the demon anymore. There was only a few articles about the demon though. Apparently most people that come in contact with one don't survive. Those that have survived it said other demons follow them for the rest of their life. However, with it being dead, all I had to do was find where it put my sister. That also meant there wasn't a chance I could find her alive if I did find her. However, there was one article I came across that stood out to me. A woman in her early 20s had been held captive and tortured by one. After a week of her hiding, she finally escaped. Find the woman's name in the article. I needed to find her to hear the whole story. Maybe, just maybe, they could help me find my sister. I sat there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to wrap my head around what I just heard coming through my radio. It all felt like some horrible dream that I just couldn't wake up from. I turned the radio off and drove the hour back home. I sat there completely in silence the entire way, too scared to turn the radio back on, in fear of what it might say next. Thoughts of my son and my sister filled my head. I had to find a way to keep my son safe while also getting my sister back unharmed. There had to be something I could do. Finally, after driving for an hour, I pulled back into my driveway. Luckily, nothing else happened on the way home. The demon's voice was still stuck in my head, like an old broken record. I was extremely happy to be home. I jumped out of my car, almost running up my driveway to my front door. John must have heard me closing my car door. He greeted me at the front door, hugging me tighter than he ever has. We sat down on the coach. Stephen was already asleep. John wanted to hear everything about my day. "Come on, baby, tell me everything. I need to know what happened," John said, excited to learn if I found out anything helpful. "They want Stephen. The demon said he would be their king." "John, it's not just one demon we are going against, it's all of them. They will do everything they can to get him." Tears were welling up in my eyes. The thought of someone or something taking my son was absolutely heartbreaking to me. No matter what, I couldn't let them take him. But now as a mere mortal supposed to stop all of the underworld. The most evil of all evil was coming for our sweet little boy, who may not have been an angel, but he definitely wasn't a demon, much less the one that could rule over all evil things in the earth and hell. I couldn't imagine how they could even think or believe that he was one of them. A mix of fear and anger grew inside me. The anger was beginning to take over what fear I had. I've never been one to take shit from anyone. I might be a woman and seem weak or delicate. Most people only see my soft and sweet side. But I'm from the south. Everyone knows you don't mess with a southern woman, especially a southern mama. We will do whatever it takes to protect the ones we love. John could see my fear quickly turning into rage, so much anger filling in my eyes. Something most people haven't ever seen in me. He pulled me in close to him, holding me tight as I laid my head on his shoulder. "Shh, it's okay, Joe. Everything will be okay. We'll figure it out together. We always do, baby," John softly whispered into my ear. I knew in that moment that we would find a way. We would do whatever we had to do in order to keep our son safe while also getting my sister back. I could finally see light at the end of a dark tunnel. Everything began to seem lighter and almost back to normal. At least as normal as possible. I pulled my head off his shoulder, leaning into him as I kissed his lips. The first real kiss we'd had, shared in such a long time. The warmth from his lips felt so loving. He was so much of my strength, a big reason I always felt so strong. With him by my side and him having my back, I could do anything. He's my rock. We cuddled on the couch, just holding each other, something we haven't been able to do since everything started. It was nice to have a moment just to ourselves, a moment just to breathe. It felt like I haven't been able to take a breath in weeks. However, as soon as I let the breath go, the kitchen cabinets began to rattle. I looked at John. We both knew exactly why it was rattling. We were no longer scared by it. "Just lay there. I'll go get him," slightly giggling as I pulled myself up. I walked into Stephen's room, and just like that, he began to giggle. I started making notes on my phone from the articles I found. I was able to find where the woman is now. Unfortunately, she's in a mental hospital. Luckily, it was only an hour's drive. I told John my plans to go to the hospital to try to talk to the woman. He agreed, and we both thought it would be best for him to stay home with our son. I wanted to keep him out of it as much as possible. I changed clothes, then quickly grabbed everything I thought I would need, throwing everything into an oversized purse I had for road trips. I kissed my husband and son, promising to be home before dinner. After an hour of driving, I finally pulled up to the hospital. It was an old, run-down building with moss-filled trees lining the driveway. The hospital looked like it was something out of a horror movie. It was tall, at least 7 stories. It was dark and gloomy, with the feeling that something was going to jump out at any moment, to drag me away into the darkness, never to be seen or heard from again. The cloudy sky only made it look even creepier. It began to rain as I parked my car. I walked into the hospital, the thick doors loudly slamming closed behind me as I walked in. The walls were a dingy shade of yellow, while pieces of ceiling had fallen to the floor, but it seemed no one cared enough to even clean it up. A long, low-lit hallway led to a small front desk. As I walked to the desk, I noticed a small silver bell sitting there, with a note saying to ring the bell and someone would come to help. I tapped the bell, causing it to ring much louder than I thought it would. Standing there waiting by the desk, waiting for someone to come over, down one of the other halls, I felt a tap on my hot shoulder, followed by a voice. "How can I help you?" a voice said. I turned around to see an older woman standing behind me, her long white hair pulled up tight into a bun. She was wearing a nurse's outfit but looked like it was from the 50s. The white outfit plus the emerald green eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I was wondering if I could speak to Miss Sutton," I said with a smile on my face. "Well, being she's having a good day and doesn't get many visitors, I guess you can." She had a worried look on her face, like she was debating if it was really a good idea or not. She motioned for me to follow her. We talked down another extremely long hallway. It was in more of a disarray than the first hallway was. Colors and broken toys filled the sides of the floor. The walls were a pea green with writing all over them. The hallway looked like it was meant for a child's ward, but there was no laughter. All the doors were closed so you couldn't see inside them. It was like something from a horror movie where you expect a child to pop out, but no one did. The silent hallway was more terrifying than any other horror movie I had ever seen, and the fact that nothing happened made it even scarier. The anticipation made it even more horrifying. The hallway led to an old elevator. Stepping inside it sent my anxiety into overdrive. It shook and rattled the whole way, finally letting us off at the top floor, which for the most part looked about the same nasty green-colored walls. Instead of toys and crayons covering the floor, it was bits and pieces of the ceiling. I could feel some small pieces of it falling onto my shoulder as we walked to a door. Standing there waiting for her to open the door. "I have to ask you if you have any sharp objects on you. Please leave them outside the door." Her hand reaching for the doorknob. I wasn't sure what I'd find inside the room. I'd never been inside a mental hospital, but this place definitely wasn't what I was expecting. She held the doorknob with one hand as she placed the key inside the keyhole with the other. Giggling it open, she pushed open the door. "I'll be back in an hour to get you," she said with a pleasant smile. I walked inside the room. The nurse slapped the door shut behind me, making a loud bang as it closed. I could hear her locking the door before walking away. I looked down at my phone. It was 1 p.m. Wow, I'd already been here longer than I thought. I think it was just before noon I pulled into the driveway. I saw a woman that was now in her mid-40s, sitting down at a small table. Her long red hair draped down her back. Her clothes seemed baggy, like they were 3 sizes too big. She was drawing a picture as she sat there in silence, not even noticing that I was in the room with her. Miss Sutton, do you mind talking to me about a few things from your past? I could really use your help to find my sister. I think the same demon that kidnapped you has also taken my sister," I softly said as I sat down on the bed. beside the small table she was sitting at. Finally feeling the elevator stop. It didn't crash or begin to burn. It just softly came to a stop. The fog disappeared before my eyes. The elevator doors opened to a sight I thought I'd never see, much less ever wanted to see. I could feel the warm air filling the elevator. Taking a step out of the elevator, hell definitely was not what I was expecting. Everyone always thinks of hell as a pit of fire where someone burns for all eternity. At least that was what they always said in church. 2 demons were standing outside the elevator. My heart raced as I saw them standing there waiting for me. My heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest, and run away as they stood there watching me. A wicked smile crossed their faces before one spoke to me. "Hello, Miss Joe. We've been waiting for you. Lucifer told me you'd like a word. Come, we must not keep him waiting." His voice sounded almost kind as he spoke to me. A long blood-red rug laid on blackwood flooring. The walls were dark red wallpaper with hanging candles for light. A long hallway led from the elevator to a spacious room. In the room were 2 tall thrones. Along the edge of the walls were snapdragons that filled from one corner to the other. In between the 2 thrones were huge amounts of blood-red roses. The room had an almost romantic feel to it. "Dear sweet Joe, it's so nice of you to drop by. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. You certainly know how to keep a man waiting." A soft chuckle left the man's lips. The man was very tall, with a muscular body. His muscles were ripping under his shirt. The brightest blue eyes I'd ever seen. It was like looking into a clear blue ocean. Wavy blonde hair that he had slicked back with a few small pieces laying down by his eyes. His dark red button-up shirt with black jeans matched the room almost perfectly. He stood up from his throne, rolling his sleeves, smiling at me as he took a step closer, holding his hand out for mine. I laid my hand onto his. "How would you like a tour of hell?" he asked as he placed my hand on the inside of his tricep. Nodding my head, far too shocked to be able to form a sentence. He was very handsome, with an almost angelic charm, as he guided me into the next hallway. My husband John and I adopted a sweet baby boy a few months ago. At first, everything was fine and normal, as we got used to having a small child around. Due to some medical problems I have, I was told I would probably never be able to carry a child of my own. Being so many kids need to be adopted, we decided to go that route. We honestly didn't care how old the child was, what race, or what gender. We just wanted to give a child a good home. We have wanted to be parents ever since we first got married 10 years ago. However, a few weeks ago, weird things started happening. I thought I was losing my mind from a lack of sleep. At least until John started experiencing these things too. I don't know, maybe we are both going crazy. Maybe it's all in our heads. Maybe none of it is even real. Things like this aren't supposed to happen. We were always taught that this kind of stuff wasn't real. At first it was small things, like a cup falling off the table, even though no one was around or close to it. We checked our AC, but it was off. This time of year in Louisiana, it's still cold enough to not have the AC on all the time, but not cold enough for the heater to be on. The first few times wasn't a big deal. I mean, things fall, right? Seriously though, it gets kind of creepy when the same cup falls over and over again. Even after picking it up and placing it on the very back of the counter against the wall. After a while, it wasn't just falling and rolling off the counter anymore. It started flying off the countertops, tables, walls. At that point, it wasn't just cups, it was everything, flying feet away from where they were supposed to be. After a while, I noticed that the things only broke when he was upset. However, when he was happy, the TV would turn on, but only to upbeat musicals, which we were fine with for the most part at least. It was creepy when it would randomly turn on at 3 a.m, but it could have been worse, right? A couple of weeks ago, it was brought to my attention that when I posted pictures of them, that his eyes were super dark. To the point that if I didn't know better, I would have thought they were pure black, with a bright red ring around them. In a weird way, it was actually kind of beautiful and couldn't take your eyes off them. Though in person, his eyes just looks a beautiful shade of brown with a small black ring around them. As his hair began to grow out some, his almost light brown hair turned a bright red, almost like flames from fire. John thought it was cute that he actually looked like he could have been our biological son. We loved him like he was. John has bright red hair and blue eyes, while I have a golden honey color eyes and brown hair. However, I was going through the pictures I've taken of ours over the past few months. Our son's facial features seem to be changing a lot more than either of us had really noticed. It's almost like he's trying to look like us, which I know sounds crazy. I've never seen a child change so much, so quickly. A few nights ago, he was really upset about something, but we couldn't figure out what was wrong. I changed his diaper and clothes, tried to feed him, even tried giving him a warm bath. However, as soon as I put him into the water, it started bubbling. It became even hotter. It was so hot it burned my hands when I picked him up. Yet nothing on him was burns or even red. While I was drying him off, his eyes turned blood red. I can't lie, it terrified me in ways I never thought possible. After getting him dressed, I decided we should watch TV in the living room with John. I sat down on one side of the couch, our son in my lap, having his head rest against me. John moved closer to me. As he did, the cabinet doors started rattling a little. Closer he scooted towards me, and louder it would rattle. As John led into me, all of the glass cups exploded. We both jumped from how loud it was, with every glass cup breaking at the same time. It was like an explosion going off in our kitchen. John got up to clean everything up for me. I swear I heard our son laugh, but it wasn't the normal baby kind of giggle. It was deep, even deeper than I've ever heard a man laugh, or even talk. It definitely didn't seem natural, or even from this world. After John was finished cleaning the kitchen, he sat down next to it again. Within a few seconds, a steak knife from the kitchen stabbed into the back of his arm. After calling an ambulance to take John to the hospital, I called my sister, asking her to come over to watch the baby while I went to the hospital with John. Luckily, my sister lives only a few minutes away. She pulled into the driveway just moments before the ambulance did. I followed closely behind in my car. After a couple of hours, the doctor slowly and carefully pulling his knife out, stitching up his arm before wrapping it. They sent us home with medicine and gauze for his arm. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed every light in my house was off. No glow from a TV or anything. I opened the front door, and all I heard was a creepy kid's nursery rhyme. We both took our shoes off as we walked into the house. I reached for the light switch as John followed me into the house. I called out for my sister, but nothing. Looking around the living room and kitchen, not able to find her. I kept calling out to her, but again, nothing. John and I walked into the nursery. Our son was sitting off by himself in his crib. He started to giggle, but a soft, cute baby giggle as I walked over to him. He reached his little hands out for me. I couldn't help but smile, realizing my sweet little boy just wanted his mama. I picked him up, laying his head on my shoulder as we continued to search the house. My sister would never just leave a child, especially a newborn, alone in a house. Walking into my bedroom, hoping to find my sister asleep on the bed, I turned on the light over my bed. She wasn't there. I could faintly hear the sound of running water from my bathroom. I asked John to hold our baby while I walked into the bathroom, calling out my sister's name before opening the bathroom door. I figured she was probably taking a bath and just couldn't hear me calling her name through the house. I stepped closer to the door as my hand reached the knob. My feet felt wet. Looking down, water was beginning to run under the door. I peed the bathroom door open, hardly able to see anything with just the light from my bedroom shining from behind me. I turned the bathroom light on. My sister was in the bath, fully clothed. Both of her wrists were sliced open as the blood flowed through bathroom with the water. Above her, written in her own blood, was a small, simple word. Ral.